This is a tale of ancient times, an era before the human and non-human worlds were forever divided. Meliodas, the dragon son of wrath and leader of the knights known as the Seven Deadly Sins, stands as the strongest knight in the land of Britannia, having proven his worth by defeating countless evils. Yet, one question remains. Meliodas might be powerful, but how can that power be quantified? Well, that's where I come in. So, strap yourselves down as I full counter some math and data into your brain, as today we're going to calculate the physical power and speed of the dragon son of wrath, Meliodas.
This incomprehensible power is that of the legend!
Seven deadly sins, the sin of wrath, the dragon sin, Meliodas.
Hello Internet, Jojo here, and I've come to a conclusion. If I was one of the seven deadly sins, I would be Jojo, the axolotl sin of overthinking. But that's not really a thing. Anyways, today we're going to be taking a stab. That was a poor choice of words. Today we will be taking a chance at calculating the pure offensive power and speed of the dragon son of wrath, Meliodas. And believe me, this ain't going to be simple. To start this off, we're going to talk about one of the most iconic feats in the series, the destruction of Bastate Prison. You see, when Meliodas was trying to gather all the sins together, he found himself heading for the prison where he hoped to find the fox sin of greed, Bon the Undead. After dealing with some hypnotism, bugs, the invisible man, Meliodas found Bon, who had just escaped on his own because he was bored. The two sins proceeded to arm wrestle and ended up accidentally ripping down the entire prison. Guys, this is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. It's just cool. Now, to find how much energy Bon and Meliodas would have had to produce in order to break this, we first need to find Bastate Prison's height. So compare the doorway into Bastate Prison to Diane, and we see that this prison door is about equal to her height of 30 feet, if a tad shorter. Taking this height and applying it to this panel, and Bastate Prison ends up having a total internal volume of 58,463,000 cubic feet. However, that's just the total volume. The prison is obviously not one solid chunk of rock. It has many cells, hallways, and wards. The standard size for a real-life prison cell is 6 by 9 by 12 feet. Google's a wonderful thing. Sometimes. Including the thickness of walls from this panel, we find that the total internal volume of one room is 2,258.12 cubic feet with a rock volume of 1,611 cubic feet. With the volume of rock per cell known, we just need to divide the volume of said cell by the total volume of the prison. Doing that, we find that Bastate Prison had, on average, 25,878 rooms, and each of them should have about 1,611 cubic feet of rock for its walls and floor. Multiplying that rock volume by the number of rooms in the prison, and we find that Bon and Meliodas destroyed 41.6 million cubic feet of rock. Converting this over to cubic centimeters and multiplying it by the standard value for violent fragmentation of stone, 69 joules per cubic centimeter, we find that Bon and Meliodas had to generate 19.469 kilotons of TNT, or 9.364 kilotons each, to destroy the prison like this. This is not nearly as powerful as many other feats in the series, but it's nothing to sneeze at, especially when you account for some of Meliodas' power-ups for the series. Meliodas had several major power-ups, and they all gave a specific numerical value. So, the first thing we need to know is exactly how many times each of his power-ups increased his strength, and the way we're going to do that is by use of his combat class. At the start of the story, Meliodas had a power level of 3,370. After his first power-up, his level increased to 32,500. This means that this specific power-up gave a total increase of 9.64 times. The next power-up Meliodas got spiked his level from 32,500 to 60,000. This is an increase of 1.846 times. The power-up after this went from 60,000 to 142,000, a 2.366 times multiplier. This means that from the start of the series, Meliodas got about 42 times more powerful overall. However, Meliodas has another power-up, but unlike the others, it does not give any specific numbers. You see, Meliodas went toe-to-toe with the Demon King and showed that he was certainly on par with him. We know the Demon King divided his power in half and split it up among all the 10 commandments. So, to find his strength, we will simply add all the power levels of all the 10 commandments together. Doing that, we find a power level of 461,000. That is about 3.2465 times greater than Meliodas' 142,000. Then, towards the end of the fight, Meliodas just began to wreck the Demon King, but this was due to the fact that Meliodas unlocked the same power as the Demon King. The issue here appears when he returns to the kingdom. The Demon King's power began to cause natural disasters and threaten the country, so Meliodas gave that power up so that he can stay in Britannia with Elizabeth, and thus ended the arc and possibly the entire series at a power level of 461,000. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that most of these power-ups were permanent boost, so once he got them, he kept them. Essentially, the only Gear Second Super Saiyan-like power-ups that Meliodas got is the Assault mode. Now, before you mention it, I know that both the Demon Mark and his Berserk form were activation-based power-ups, but they are probably just partial activation of Assault mode. I mean, both the Demon Mark and the shadows from his Berserk mode show up in Assault mode. So, all this means is that, depending on where the feat that I'm calculating shows up in the story's timeline, we will apply the proper multiplier to it. For the feats that he did early in the series, we would end up multiplying it by about 136.8 times. If he did a feat at the end of the series in his base form, we would multiply it by 2.366 times for Assault mode. So, scaling up the destruction of Bastet Prison to this, we find that if Meliodas was to output the same amount of effort now that he did when he arm-wrestled Ban, he would generate over 1,331 kilotons of TNT. This is some incredible power. It is the equivalent of 63 little boy bombs. To put this in perspective, energy like this would be equivalent to an explosion with a fireball that would incinerate everything within a 6.23 square kilometers or 2.4 square miles. This would easily cover the entire distance between the island of New York and the Statue of Liberty. Some would call that rather big, and I would call that very powerful. The next feat that I want to talk about comes when Gilthunder first confronted Meliodas in the Forest of White Dreams. Gilthunder claims that he could destroy him along with the forest. Of course, then Meliodas claims that it was impossible, but Meliodas is likely referring to the killing him part of that statement. So, we're going to assume that what Gilthunder said about being able to destroy the forest is true. Now, of course, to no one's surprise, the Forest of White Dreams is not a real place in Scotland, and is too far away from the real application of the Caledonia Forest for it to be the Caledonia Forest. This means no shortcuts, so instead, we're going to have to take what the characters say and extrapolate from there. Right before Meliodas and Elizabeth find Diane, Elizabeth says that they've been walking for about 3 hours. So, using a walking speed of 3.1 miles per hour, and they must have covered about 15 kilometers or about 9.3 miles. Because the forest itself is depicted as a circle, it must cover about 706.86 square kilometers or about 272.9 square miles. This is about twice the size of Las Vegas. This is big. Now, for this calculation, we're going to be using a new formula I found. It's very complicated, and I'm not 100% sure of how it works, but I do know that it works. I tested it several times and was able to make it make sense. In this formula, W represents tons of TNT, and P is the pressure in bars. Not the Las Vegas kind of bars. What I worked out is that after putting the radius of the affected area in this formula, you then have to judge how much destruction was dealt or would have been dealt. If someone punches the ground and the shockwave completely polarizes everything for the entire area, you would use a 200 psi pressure, as that is considered extreme damage. If you only wanted to uproot some trees, like what we're doing, then use 3 psi, as that is the point for moderate damage. So, plugging these values into this formula and smacking the equal sign, we find that Gilthunder was bragging about being able to produce a whopping 12,800,000 tons of TNT, or about 12.8 megatons of TNT. Due to the fact that Meliodas and Gilthunder were rather on par with each other, and at one point Meliodas even said that he was going all out, Meliodas must be able to generate a similar level of power if he really wanted to, though he is likely much stronger. Scaling it up to Meliodas' current form, and this feat comes in at a whopping 4,142 megatons of TNT, or 4.142 gigatons of TNT. However, this gets blown out of the water later on. Now it comes to the final battle between the 7 deadly sins and the Demon King. In order to put the Demon King down for good, all the sins combine their power and launch one massive final attack. Meliodas then uses his full counter ability to hit it 7 times, doubling its power every time, and then smacks it into the Demon King. The resulting explosion is so massive that in order to find its size, we have to compare it to the size of Earth. Outlining the Earth and placing the panel along its curve, we find this explosion was about 1,574.03 kilometers wide. This is just slightly less than half the diameter of the moon. An airburst explosion so massive would be worth around 80 teratons of TNT. This would easily cause a global catastrophe. But of course, Meliodas did not produce this by himself. Reducing it by 7 times, and then dividing it by the Sins who actually added power to the attack, that would be excluding Merlin and Gother, we find that Meliodas must be capable of generating 125 gigatons of TNT. Of course, this is also assuming that the power was split evenly among the Sins. Now, before we move on, let me just ask, have you subscribed? Because if you've made it this far and you've not subscribed, you're going to be missing out on future videos. So make sure you do that. Also, leave a like on this video, it really helps. Oh, and while you're at it, please make sure that your notifications are on. I'm not sure I trust YouTube to do their job right, so please make sure you're getting notified of when I release a video. That said, let's move on to another feat. Let's talk about the feat that everyone's wanting to know about, the destruction of Danforth. After Liz, Elizabeth the prequel, is murdered by Fraudrin in front of Meliodas, being the Son of Wrath, he unleashed a massive attack so powerful that it completely destroyed the entire city of Danforth, leaving a massive crater. The city of Danforth is stated to have rivaled Leonis, so we will be taking the size of Leonis and using that for this calculation. When Gother was going a bit nuts earlier on in the series, he used an ability that affected every person in a 3-mile radius. Comparing the effect of Gother's attack in this panel to the city, we find that Leonis is about 7,716 meters wide, and would have an area of about 46.8 square miles. That said, we don't actually have an official depth for this hole, but we can use this panel from when Hendrickson and Dreyfus first met Fraudrin to find the hole's depth. By comparing the known diameter of the city to pixels in this image, we find that we are viewing from a distance of about 16,938 meters. However, as we know, this attack also stretched into the sky, so taking the size of the city and comparing it to what we can see of the Shadow's beam, we find that this beam must have had a volume of 1,297 cubic kilometers or 311 cubic miles of stone. Comparing this volume to cubic centimeters and then multiplying that by the pulverization value for stone, 214.35 joules per cubic centimeter, and this attack must have generated about 66.45 gigatons of TNT. This is easily 1,300 times more powerful than the world's most powerful nuclear bomb, and yet, for some reason, the 10 Commandments still think that it's a good idea to make Meliodas angry.
Not a great plan.
Meliodas does this just a few years before he formed the Sins, so at this point he probably had a power level of around 32,500, as that is the power that Merlin stole from him. So, scaling this to his current base power, and we find that he should be able to generate about 14.18 times more energy, or 942 gigatons of TNT. Of course, this is his base power. If you multiply by the power increase of Assault Mode, and it comes to a massive 2,230 gigatons of TNT. This is way more than enough to sink some islands, and is 1/4 the energy needed to sink Iceland. Guys, it's been a fun ride, and it's gonna get funner because now we get to talk about Escondor himself. Praise the sun. Praise the sun. This is where we make a large power jump by scaling Meliodas to Escondor. Escondor's magic allows him to create a small sun and then hurl it at the enemy. The thing is, the sun is very dense, about 1.41 grams per cubic centimeter, and as we know, creating mass requires a massive amount of energy. And because of this, we have to use the formula E equals mc squared. We are bringing out the big guns here, guys. Escondor's largest sun that he makes is when he smacks Esterosa with it in their first fight. By comparing the size of the sun to Zeldris, who is at a better angle for measurement, we find this sun must have a volume of 152 million cubic centimeters. As I already mentioned before, the density of the sun is around 1.41 grams per cubic centimeter. This means that this sun must have a weight of 214,320 kilograms. Over 200,000 kilograms, and Escondor threw it like a baseball. For Escondor to create this much mass, he must be capable of generating about 4.6 teratons of TNT by himself. Of course, we really don't know what time of day this happened, but we can assume it was nearing noon quickly, as Escondor's power level was specifically stated to be growing, and he even said that he should not go back to Leonis because he can't keep his sacred treasure in check. This means that he was passively gaining so much energy and heat that his weapon could not hold it all, and that he was about to become the one. This is why I think it was pretty close to noon. So, because of that, we're going to say that he was at a power level of about 114,000, as that was his last recorded power before he became the one in his fight with Meliodas. So, end of series Meliodas, while using Assault Mode, should have a power level of over 1,090,000. Dividing these two power levels, and Meliodas should be about 9.5 times stronger than Escondor at this time, meaning that Meliodas is capable of generating a max of 44 teratons of TNT. Now, you might be thinking that a power level of over 1,000,000 seems way too high, but the Demon King that they are fighting in Purgatory is old and weak. Meliodas never used Assault Mode when fighting against a Demon King in Purgatory, nor does he use it when he resurrects. It's only when the Demon King gets back to his prime power does Meliodas start using Assault Mode. So in short, Meliodas can generate 44 teratons of TNT by scaling to Escondor. However, this is what Escondor has shown. Estarossa, on the other hand, is much stronger. I don't know why. Escondor and him have the same power, so they should be pretty much on par with each other, but clearly that's not the case. When Estarossa is fighting the original demon, he unleashed the greatest sun. This sun, it's so massive that it makes all the other suns that Escondor did look like garbage. By comparing it to Estarossa in this panel, we find it's about 3,181 centimeters in diameter. This would give a volume of about 16.9 billion cubic centimeters and a mass of about 23.829 billion grams. Using E equals mc squared, we find that to create this much mass, Estarossa must have generated about 2.141 septillion joules, or 551 teratons of TNT. Now, when Estarossa, or Male, depending on which one to call him, got his sunshine power back, he was stated to have a power level of around 200,000. So, scaling this up to Assault Mode Meliodas, and his grand total power comes to be about 2,791 teratons of TNT, or 2.79 petatons of TNT. Honestly, this is a lot higher than I thought it was going to be. Luckily, I didn't make this video until after I figured out how to use the energy mass equation. Now, I'm sure some of you don't like how I'm treating Meliodas' power-ups, but of course, you're free to take my numbers and do what you want with the power-ups. Finding Meliodas' speed is tricky, but it won't be as complicated as his power. So where do we start? Well, I think we should start here with Gilthunder. From the many times that Meliodas and Gilthunder fought, Meliodas has proven that he is as fast or possibly even faster than the leader of a lightning bolt. The leader of a lightning bolt moves at about 220,000 miles per hour, or Mach 208. So, applying the before mentioned power-ups to the speed, base Meliodas should be capable of moving at about 30,095,000 miles per hour, or Mach 39,223. This is probably the fastest speed that we can pull from Meliodas himself, as many of his later feats involving lightning are not that impressive and happened long after he became far stronger. That said, other characters actually have dealt with lasers. Diane, for one, was fast enough to intercept a laser from practically point-blank range. But when Male was going crazy from the power of the Four Commandments, he began to fire off both beams of light and darkness. When one of these beams was about to hit Oslo, Diane throws her arm through the portal, says a few words, and then reflects the beam back. By using Gother in this panel, we discovered that the beam is about 11.16 feet from Oslo. For the record, I'm using feet here because I used it to measure Diane's arm and it turned out perfectly. Diane's arm is exactly 8 feet long, and we know that she moved her entire arm to its full extension to reflect the laser. So this means the laser did not move a full 11 feet to Oslo, but was stopped before it could move any more than 3.16 feet. Now, normal people would think that the next step is pretty simple, as Diane moved her entire 8-foot arm in the time it took for the laser to move 3.16 feet. That's actually not the case. We have to include the distance and time of the reflected laser, as we know that the time that Diane reached his max arm, the laser had begun to reflect. Now, using the length of Diane's hand, we find the light moved about an extra 5.1 feet. All this means is that we end with 11.16 feet, plus the reflected 5.1 feet, minus the 8 feet of Diane's arm. By finding the time that it would cover the distance in, and then see how fast Diane would move her arm 8 feet in that time, we find that Diane would need to be moving at about 649 million miles per hour, or about 96.7% the speed of light. This speed is all nice and good, but how do we compare it to Meliodas? We don't get any power levels towards the end of this series. So instead of that, we're going to assume that for the most part, they are still in the same power order as when they started, meaning that the ratio of power between the end of series No Assault Mode Meliodas and Diane are the same as when they start. At the start of the series, Meliodas had a power level of 3,370 and Diane had a power level of 3,250. This means that Meliodas should be about 1.036923 times faster. This takes Meliodas to be almost exactly light speed. But including assault mode, and this speed spikes to 1,592,000,000 miles per hour, or about 2.374 times the speed of light. While some of you might think that Meliodas should scale the end of series Bon, he doesn't. When Bon gets his sacred treasure back, he is able to kill a lot of these demon dandelions in an instant. The problem is that this speed and range is his sacred treasure's magical ability, and is not comparable to Meliodas. It would be the same as giving Bon Meliodas' clones. They're just different powers and you can't really do that. But even then, when on a relatively even playing field, Bon has always been faster while Meliodas has always been stronger. That's just the way it's always worked. Now, here is where I would put durability, but I don't feel like talking about that today, and this video is already going to be very long. So, if you guys want a video on Meliodas' durability, just keep asking in the comments. You know how to get things done. That said, until next time, thanks for watching. Remember to stay spectacular. JoJo, out.